Hey, what's up, everybody, and welcome back to episode 18 of the Emotional Bankroll podcast, a series where I interview daily fantasy sports professionals about the mental health and lifestyle of playing DFS for a living. You may have the financial means to go pro, but do you have the emotional bankroll to deal with the highs and lows? Welcome, I'm Brian Jester, and today's episode, the guest is me, Court Jesters on DraftKings, at Brian Jester FF on Twitter. I'm the Emotional Bankroll podcast creator, co-founder of Occupy Fantasy, DraftKings $1 million winner, 2019 FanDuel World Fantasy Football Champion runner-up, and I have over $600,000 in UFC DFS winnings over the last 18 months. In this episode, I brought on Niromada to interview me. Niromada is a top PGA DFS player, and he's the PGA writer at OccupyFantasy.com. The reason I brought him on is because over the last couple of years, we've had many conversations about the mental side of doing this for a living, and he was one of the biggest inspirations for even starting this entire podcast series. So in this episode, I chatted with Niromada about how my upbringing impacted and influenced my career path, both the excitement and the fear of winning $1 million in DFS, my transition from corporate life to full-time fantasy sports, how I handle long and significant financial downswings, and what the pros and cons are of this lifestyle. Now, this is the final episode of season 1 of the Emotional Bankroll podcast. To get notified when season 2 is released, just make sure you're subscribed, whether it's here on YouTube or on your favorite podcast app. And if you like it, we'd appreciate it if you give it a thumbs up here on YouTube. And if you really like it, give it a 5-star rating and review in those podcast apps. And if you really, really like it, share it on social media and let others know so they can find out about the show. All right. Let's get to it. All right, let's get started. And I'm actually not the one getting it started this time. So I'm going to kick it over to the new host for this episode, Niromada. Niro, what's up, man? How are you?
Hey, Brian. How are you doing?
I'm good. Thanks for doing this. As I said in the intro, you're one of the main inspirations for this podcast. So I figured you were the perfect co-host to come back on here and grill me and interview me about the lifestyle of being a DFS player.
That's great. I love being the inspiration for anything, as long as it's good. So, thank you for letting me do the hosting. I'm looking forward to this, and I hope the listeners are as well.
I think they are. It was asked for by many people, so we'll see if we can deliver it for you. So the floor is yours. The interview is all yours now.
Awesome. All right. Well, hopefully I'll be representing the people on Twitter and in the comments that I read about. So. Okay, so I think one of my most interesting things about you once I got to know you was your background from your family and your upbringing and their involvement in horse racing and in the world of horse racing. So it really made me wonder, do you think that helped you in any way for your DFS play, or did it influence the path that you chose? I have an opinion there, but I'm curious to get your take on it.
Yeah, and I've said this before, and I think because of my upbringing, I really didn't have a choice. This was the path that I was always destined for because of the horse racing background. My father raised and trained horses for 30 or 40 years. My mom helped out. So a lot of Friday and Saturday nights were spent at the racetrack. And with that, just being around a lot of degenerates betting on horses. And adjacent to that is sports betting, is gambling, weekend trips to Atlantic City. And when you're younger, right, and people who are older than you can do things that you can't do, you want to do them even more. So when we're at the racetrack and people are betting on horses and winning money for betting on horses, I want to do that too. When we go to Atlantic City and my brother and I are stuck in the room playing video games and everyone's downstairs at the craps table, I want to play craps as soon as I can, right? So I think that had a big influence on it. I don't think it helped me in any way from... I think maybe the only thing it may have helped me is seeing some of the people who took it too far, people at the racetrack or at the gambling, and lost their asses and ruined their lives because of it. And that was always in the back of my mind that I can never let that happen to me. But I think with all of that growing up, I didn't have a choice. And when I was, I think 6 years old, maybe, my grandma would come to the track and she would quote unquote watch us while she gambled and bet on horses. And sometimes she would say, "Hey, Brian, pick a couple horses." And then one Friday night, I picked a trifecta or something and she hit big and I got $50 from it. And I was like, wow, I didn't predict it at the time, right? But I could see if something's going to happen, I can get money from that. And I think from then on, it was just, I got to do this.
You were done at that point. The hook was set. It was over.
For sure.
There's definitely something too, I think, about just growing up and thinking that's normal. When you're a kid, what you think is normal is whatever the environment is around you. And for you, like that was normal. You're like, doesn't everybody do this? Don't other kids spend their Friday and Saturday nights at the track? Like that's what I do. That's what my brother does. Like that just feels like a normal thing to me.
That's very true. And I think actually that probably, and I said it didn't help much, but it probably does help me think in the lines of risk reward, where I think a lot of people you meet out in the world either don't have much risk tolerance at all, or they don't even think about the world probabilistically. Whereas that's all I thought of growing up was if you risk this, you can win this or lose this, or this is likely to happen, or this isn't likely to happen. And that probably did help me think about just whether it's betting or poker or DFS probabilistically, and just not being afraid to risk something to gain something.
Yeah, and you never, I mean, you always have to learn the hard lessons in that. Like you have to lose your bankroll a few times yourself. Like it's just a given. It's like a rite of passage. But for you to even see that and recognize the danger of that at a young age, I think also had to help you be more disciplined than the average person, like starting off into an endeavor like DFS.
Without question, without question. Then when you start going into poker and then you see everything there, and then you do sports betting, you see everything there. By the time I got to DFS, I was really well seasoned in what all of that meant and how important it was.
Yeah, totally. Okay, so speaking of DFS, you're really known, or you came on the scene, let's say, for the 2019 year where you won the Millie Maker at the Super Bowl. Later, you finished second at the FanDuel Fantasy Baseball Championship for 250K. I know you've told the Millie story on other podcasts. Obviously, I've heard the Millie story from you directly as well. But I'm really curious on what your mindset was like after that win, and then did it change at all when you then kind of got the affirmation later on in the fantasy football championship? I might have said baseball initially, but it was the fantasy football championship for FanDuel for 250K. I'm curious, like, I know initially it had to give you a sense of relief because you're like, okay, I made the choice to do this endeavor. Now I've got a big bankroll and I can do it. But I'm curious on what was the evolution from the time that you win that to then the time that you get second in the world championship, whatever that was, 8, 9, 10 months later.
That year was really a whirlwind because in the interview I did after the Millie, I explicitly talked about when there was 4 minutes left in the game, thinking in my head that this can literally change my life, right? And that was in my head, and that was obviously the immediate reaction after I won the Millie. This can change my life. So really, the mindset after the Millie was threefold. It was, first of all, that excitement that, wow, I have a massive bankroll. I can take a lot more shots. I can play this way more seriously. I can have more freedom potentially if I decide to do this full time. But then also a lot of pressure and fear, even because pressure from a personal standpoint of, okay, I got to prove that I can do this again. It wasn't a one-hit wonder. Anybody can win a Millie. We see 60, 70 a year. Anybody can win a Millie, right? Anybody can get lucky and do that. But can I do something like that again? And then that pressure also extends to Occupy Fantasy, which I was running before the Millie. And now, again, anyone can market it and say they won a Millie. But if I win another contest, now there's not much detractors can really say is, okay, this guy won a Millie, anyone 250K, anyone whatever else, okay, this site must really be legit, right? So the pressure was twofold from a personal brand, but then also from the company brand as well. And if I wanted to do this full time, Occupy Fantasy had to be a big part of that. So that pressure was there as well. But then there was also this genuine fear of, okay, 3 days later, I wake up and there's 1.x million dollars in my bank account, a dollar figure I have never seen before nor imagined that would ever be in my bank account. And now I have this fear of, am I going to lose it all? Because I saw what happened growing up, people losing it all. I've seen poker stories, sports betting stories of really good players, really good bettors, better than I was at the time, lose it all. Slash, am I not going to invest this properly, right? $1 million probably won't set you up for your entire life, but it can get you damn near close if you do it properly. So I had this fear because I didn't have a huge financial background, a huge money management background, that, okay, if I do something wrong here, one slip up or a couple slip ups or not talking to the right people, really this $1 million could go away, and all this freedom and enjoyment I envision could disappear soon. And that was a driving fear literally the entire year. And it's still, even to this day, it still drives me because I don't want that to happen.
It's interesting. I wouldn't have thought of it that way. I always think of it just from the pressure that it would have taken off. But it's interesting for you because you understood how easily it could go away. And you probably understood better than most people starting off. I know you didn't get a full understanding until you really started doing DFS full time on like how crazy the variance is of doing it. But I can see how that, knowing that or having an idea of that when you started, kind of added to that fear of like, ooh, don't mess it up. Like, how hard was it for me to win this milli? Like, I cannot mess this up. I might not ever get another chance like this again in my life to have like this big of a pile to start to invest and work with.
I mean, that's literally the thinking, right? It's like this is a once in a lifetime opportunity, probably, right? And I can't mess it up. And then you mentioned the 250K later that year. That was just 7 or 8 weeks after I decided to leave my full-time job, and that was obviously it made my decision very justified, right? Because I had to explain this decision. We'll talk about that here in a second, but explain this decision to everyone in my life that I wanted to quit this very stable job and do this very risky profession full time. But even leading up to that 250K, again, going back to the fear and the pressure, I had probably a 90 or 100K downswing that summer because I wasn't used to that size bankroll. I was entering contests that I hadn't researched properly, that I hadn't really looked at that much before, and just saying, I got the money, I can do it. And then you end up 90 or 100K in the hole. Obviously, you're still up, 900K or a million for the year, but that's still that portion. I lost 100K, and I had never ever thought I would lose six figures. But then that pressure is taken off right before I decided to go full time when I win 100K in NFL, and now we're quote unquote back to even for the milli for the year. But that all that just continues to build, and like you said, the pressure does get taken off from a lifestyle standpoint, but the pressure is even greater, I would say, and it's a very first world problem to have. But the pressure is great not to lose the position in life that you've gained.
For sure, there's the financial piece, like you said. There's also just the ego achiever piece of like, no, I want to be good at this. Like, I want to be one of the best in the world at this thing that I'm doing. And that, that doesn't have anything to do with the money side of it. The difference in DFS is you keep score with the money. That's like the biggest difference in DFS from other games. You keep score with like actual scores or, some other method to quantify who's the best. In DFS, it's the money.
It is, and that's the one hard part about talking to other people about what you do, and even like friends and family and stuff. It's like, oh, how's your DFS going? And it's like, oh, it was great. I won 200K a couple weeks ago, and it's like I'm not saying that to say I won $250,000 because that's so much money compared, for anyone. But I'm really just saying that's a pinnacle achievement for me this year, and it just so happens, like you said, to be measured in dollars. So it's tough to not brag about, but like just be proud of your accomplishments here when it, like you said, it is measured in dollars.
Okay, cool. Speaking of measuring things in dollars, as I work on my professional transitions, you've killed it in MMA this year. I believe you've won, more than 600K, at least in screenshots that I've seen in GPPs, including that crazy stretch, over the 3 weeks where you had the 100K win and then right after the 200K win. So, as far as I knew, or at least when I started to know, you didn't do any MMA at all. So I'm curious, how'd you get into it? How did you, or maybe the better question is, when did you figure out that you had an edge? I think that's applicable to a lot of people listening as they get into a sport or they're trying to figure out where is the place where they have an edge and where are the places where they don't. And then after that, talk a little bit about the reaction that you had to those two big wins.
So yeah, I never really watched MMA before COVID. And then once COVID hit and all the sports were shut down, it was really Korean baseball, League of Legends, UFC. And at the time, I was full time. So if I'm going to make money somehow, I need to figure out these new sports. And just sat down and did the same process I do for every other sport. It's researching what wins, what does the field do, and then can I predict player performance any better than the field is? And when we have these massive markets like NFL, like NBA, like MLB, I probably can't do that. But for smaller markets, I feel like I can. And I think the one way to tell is the limits in sports betting. If they're lower, then it's probably a softer market. You could probably predict player performance a little better. Same goes for team level performance. And when you see that League of Legends and UFC has much smaller limits than NFL, NBA, that gave me the idea. We probably can figure out the best way to do this. And so just spent all summer of 2020 researching what wins UFC contests, how can we predict player performance. And then it was probably July or August of that year, after 3 or 4 months of researching and grinding it. Oh, wow, these lineup constructions, this strategy is basically an ATM if the field doesn't change. And the field, for the most part, still hasn't changed that much over the last 2 years. And then once I looked at the player performance side of things and found that the correlation between what I could project and what was actually happening was 5, 10 times better than any of the main sports I was looking at. It's like, wow, this is a perfect storm combination here. So putting all that together, and again, improving every single week upon that process. And yeah, the two most recent wins were actually just really crazy in the sense that they were so close together, because my previous wins were 7, 8 months apart for UFC, and that's what I'd come to expect. But the big difference for these two were that I was ahead for the year on these wins, where every other big win usually had come at the end of a downswing. So I went 100K, and then 2 weeks later went 200K, and now I'm up this massive amount for the year. Instead of, and I've described this on other episodes, instead of fist pumping a sigh of relief that, phew, I've erased those losses plus some, now it's like, oh, I'm up a ton this year. And now I can start firing and planning out even bigger contests and even bigger plans for the rest of the year, which is a stark difference from when you're losing and then all of a sudden you erase it.
On that point, how do you but I guess you tell me you use math to reset like your actual physical monetary bankroll, but how do you kind of reset both your emotional and physical bankrolls at that point after those two big wins in such a short amount of time?
Fortunately, after you have one big one, like after I won the Millie, every subsequent win, the time it takes to process it gets shorter and shorter, which is kind of fucked up, right? Like it's a six-figure addition to your life. You should probably savor it a little more. But yeah, so once it sets in the next day, then the routine of the next day just starts, and now you're just looking at, okay, what do I have to do today, and what's the future look like? It really becomes more of a robotic process, which again doesn't really speak to what I think most people think the lifestyle is about. And don't get me wrong, I still savor it and cherish it and go back and look at it, and when I buy things or do things, it's like, yeah, this is because of that happened. But it really is just a process, and it's not much more than that. And yeah, it's, you want it to be more human and more emotional, but I think just, again, my growing up and being involved in poker and sports betting allows it to be to take more of the emotion out of it when making those decisions.
Yeah, it's the drug dealer business model. First one's free, and then the users spend the rest of their life chasing what that first one felt like.
That is, yeah, I mean, that's very accurate.
Yeah. On that note, for the drug dealer business model, like the dopamine hits and that kind of stuff that comes with a big win like that, and you've now experienced, multiple big wins in your career, and this one obviously is under the first world problem category. How do you come down from that? You talked about how, you wake up the next day and it's the next day, and here's the process, here's my routine, here's the stuff. I think that probably feels a little unlikely to some of the people that are listening, or maybe who haven't experienced that. So talk to me a little bit about how you kind of come down off those highs.
Yeah, so it's interesting because it depends on the sport too, right? Like if it's an NFL Classic slate, the slate ends at 6 p.m. or 7 p.m. Eastern, right? And if it's like PGA, right? If you win a big PGA contest, that's over in the afternoon. You have all day to unwind from that. But if it's UFC, like the 200K win pay-per-view, that's ending at 1 a.m. Eastern, right? And I still have to go to sleep and My fiance's waking up the next day at 8 a.m. and I got to wake up the next day and do my work. And so you have to really quickly unwind when your blood pressure's through the roof, your heart rate's through the roof, your muscles are tense. So aside from all the gadgets you've pitched to me to try to balance everything in your body, for me, what I found has worked best is it's really simple is, when it's 1 o'clock in the morning, I just want something big. I put my phone away and I just take my yoga mat out and whether it's just some kind of combination of stretching, meditation, yoga, breathing exercise, reduce my heart rate and just try to clear my mind because it's too easy to stay up all night just thinking about every little thing that just happened that you just won. So I found that's the best way for me. And again, once you get to the next day, as we talked about boasting your accomplishments to people that there's also when you have a business like a content site, you also, as gross as it is, have to put out screenshots just for the marketing aspect of things. So when I put out the screenshot of winning, you still get tiny dopamine hits that next day as the likes start coming in, as the comments start coming in. So that does extend it a bit. But really, for me, that hardest part is coming down and trying to go to sleep afterwards.
Yeah, I like that idea around the yoga. I think anything where you can get back into your body and get out of the stimulus, get out of whatever the things are that are stimulating you and return just to base level existence, me, my body, my breathing, some physical movement, postures, whatever that is can help bring that down. But yeah, the social media part of that is super dangerous because those smaller hits then are not quite as intense, but they're longer and they're more continuous.
Yeah.
And then you want to chase those further and further and further and further. It's a very insidious little cycle.
It is, and that's the beauty and horror of social media, right? You see people who comment on everything, they tweet about everything, and I see why, right? Like every time you get a notification on your phone that someone liked your tweet, it's like, wow, someone is validating what I put out there, right? And you get, as your following grows, as you're more successful, those likes increase, they become more frequent. And even to that point, right? You hear celebrities talk about it where they can get 1,000 positive comments on their Instagram photo that they have 1 million followers for, but the one negative comment, even someone who's super confident and one of the most famous people in the world, they get a comment about their appearance or something, right? And that's the only thing that sticks in your brain. And it could be the same thing for DFS players or pros or content, whatever. It's like, oh, I won this DFS contest. Here's a screenshot. Hooray me. And everyone's like, oh, congrats, Brian. You're so great. Blah, blah, blah. And it's like, oh, you got lucky. Blah, blah, blah. And it's like, then that just starts festering in your mind, even though that has nothing to do with what happened. And you have 99% other positive comments. So it's really interesting to think about.
Yeah, it's a tough one. Now, you had also said that you walked away from a recent PGA sweat that you had. I think you went for a walk. I know you ended up having a huge weekend that weekend. I don't know, somewhere over 100 or 200K. But again, I think you said you went for a walk. So like back into your body, getting out of it, getting rid of the stimulation. But how come on that one you walked away versus the other ones where you've kind of ridden the sporting event itself out to the end to see if you actually won?
It was weird, dude. I don't know. Like I've never experienced that before, right? And whenever I sweat everything, right? Most of the time, if I'm playing something, I'm watching and sweating, or at least following on DraftKings or the app or something, right? But this one, I'd had PGA sweats before, obviously. I top 10 the flop shot a bunch of times over the past 18 months or so. So, 6-figure sweats have come and gone. But for whatever reason, PGA, everything is happening at once, right? You can't just, oh, I need this to happen and I'm good. Whereas PGA, it's like, I need these 400 things to happen and they're all happening at the same time. And in this particular weekend, I was sweating first for 200K in the Snowman. I was at the point I tweeted, I was top 5 in the Millie. I was in line for 1 million live final tickets, and it was just an insane amount of money that was on the line. And the way it was just unfolding just wasn't healthy. I was literally at my computer with my TV in my office watching, and I had to remind myself, breathe, Brian, breathe. I would literally be holding my breath watching shots. It's like, this isn't healthy or fun, right? I watched the games and sweat for the fun, and it literally was not fun at all. So I said, you know what? This isn't enjoyable. I'm just going to turn this off. I'm going to go for a walk because my pulse is like 200 beats per minute. I'm just going to go walk. And then when I come back, I'm going to get lunch with my fiance. I'm not even going to check my phone, and I'll just check it at 4 o'clock or whatever. I think you texted me. It was like, hey, do you want an update or do you not want an update? How can I help? And it's like, I don't know what I want, right? Because I've never experienced this before.
Yeah, well, first of all, props to you for recognizing that and just getting up and walking away, and realizing that you're not sweating this all the way to the end. Ultimately, in the big picture, isn't going to matter for you. So if it's ceased being enjoyable, then just get up and leave and do something different.
Yeah.
Golf itself, I mean, I write obviously the plug for PGA for Occupy, and I couldn't be further down the golf rabbit hole in all ways. And at the tail end of golf events, the finishing position points are so meaningful. And when you're up near the very, very top of GPPs, like the player holes remaining almost don't matter at that point, because when one guy makes a birdie and he goes up to fifth and everyone else below him drops down to sixth, seventh, eighth, like the cascading effect of all of those things, just like you said, make you feel like I have 400 things that I need to have happen. Whereas MMA, you're like, I need one thing to happen. This fighter has to knock out this fighter in the first round. Or football, it's like, I need one touchdown pass from this quarterback to this wide receiver, and I get $250,000. And you can focus, like laser focus your attention on that. I'm guessing with PGA, get so wide in that attention focus, everything feels overwhelming then at the moment in a way that it doesn't feel overwhelming with the other sports. And then it's just like, it's too much.
Overwhelming is the perfect way to describe it. And I don't think the coverage of the event helped either, because they weren't showing all the shots on TV. The shot tracker was behind, and I was just like furiously refreshing shot tracker. And it was just like, this, you know what? The reason I quit my day job to do this because I wanted to enjoy my life. And I'm literally not enjoying this right now. And when it comes to even DFS play and decisions in life now, I've developed this mantra where do I enjoy doing this? If so, I'm going to do it. If I don't enjoy it, I'm not going to do it, because I've worked for this freedom and I've got this freedom. So now it's okay. I do not enjoy this sweat. I'll just close it, shut it off, and go see how I did later, because at this point, I only want to do things in life that I enjoy.
Yeah, that's great. I like that. Easier said than done, I think, when the bullets are flying, so to speak. But I think that's a great way to live. So, okay, you talked about wanting to enjoy things more, and that was one of the reasons why you made the decision to go DFS full time. What else went into that decision, and how did your friends and family react? Sub question to that, I think, would be, do you think they reacted differently because of what you talked about at the beginning, the way the business they're involved in and how you grew up and all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, so I'll get to that in a second, because I think they would probably have reacted the opposite of what you would expect. Because so if I was single, and at the time when I won the Millie, I would have no qualms about the second I got back from Vegas, the first day back in the work, put in my 2 weeks and just, I'll figure this out. I'm going to do this, right? I got $1 million in my bank account. Well, actually, I would wait until the $1 million was actually in my bank account. There was no stat corrections. Once that was in there, I would just put in my 2 weeks and I would figure this out, because I hated my day job. I've always hated working for someone else. A quick head start on this, right? But I have a fiance, and she was my fiance at the time, and we're in a committed partnered relationship, and anything I do affects her life as well. So I have to talk to her about this, but also I'm terrified, because this entire time I'd worked to get to this stable career where I was, from betting on sports full time, playing poker, not really having a quote unquote traditional path. And my fiance was all big about that. And even $1 million richer, that really didn't change that. So to me, I had to develop a plan and really try to justify this decision. Say, look, I'm going to be happier this way, but two, I think I can provide for us collectively together. We can have a much better life if we do this. More freedom for me to do things, more money, hopefully, to be able to do the things we want to do. So that's why it took 7-8 months to decide on doing this full time. And then it's funny, because one of the big question marks is the stability of it. And my primary talking point in pitching this to her was, sports are never going to go away, right? Sports have always been a thing. They're always going to be a thing. And then I tell this all the time as an anecdote, but it really was the truth, that 4 months later, COVID hits and sports are no longer a thing. And the day every sport goes away, she comes up to me and she goes, so, I thought sports were never going away. That's what you said, right? So what are we going to do? What are we going to do about this? And so that also drove the desire to be really good at Korean baseball and League of Legends, UFC, because that was the livelihood, and that's the promise I made. Sports weren't going away. These are the sports I'm presented with. Now I have to figure out how to deal with them. And then as far as the friends and family go, I actually think most of my friends and family were probably a little skeptical and confused, even my parents to an extent, because they saw it growing up. They know the downsides and the risk, even if you're starting your own business, which I had with Occupy Fantasy, but also wagering your own money in DFS. And for them, it was betting on horses or playing poker or gambling, whatever. They've seen it all. And they didn't want that to happen to me. Your parents always want what's best for you, right? And they wanted a stable career for me. And even my friends, all my friends from college, they're, PhDs, med school, doctors, accountants, lawyers. Like, these are qualified, accomplished people in my circle. And now they're saying one of our good friends is going to stop a stable career and do this full time. But they're my good friends, right? And they all supported me, and everyone in my life supported me. So I'm very appreciative of that. The only people that were really pumped for it and super excited I was doing this were the people in my life that I'd either played poker with growing up or a sports bet with. All my friends that were in those circles were like, hell yeah, I'm happy that you can finally do this full time because we know you've always wanted to do this.
That's great that you get that support from your friends, especially because they know it and they understand it. I didn't even think about the fact that your parents would actually be very attuned to the negative part of that, because I think most families that don't have that gaming background would be very nervous about like the degenerate angle. Like, is this really actually a career? Is this even viable? But your parents probably understood that for a very small percentage of people, like there are plenty of people that, bet horses for a living, it is actually viable. But they understand that even for those people, it's a tough lifestyle and dealing with the variance is very tough. And that's only for the successful people. And that's a very small piece. That doesn't even account for all the people who do it unsuccessfully or who have a problem or, degeneracy that they can't overcome or that kind of thing. So, I didn't even think that they would be very attuned to all of the downsides for you, making that choice.
Yeah, and again, very fortunate in all of these regards and having people in my corner that support me and even question my decisions, right? I appreciate getting other people's opinions. I value all of their opinions. So when I told them this and they were skeptical, I valued that and I appreciated that. So,
all right, let's get into my favorite part of these podcasts, which is the downswings and the lows. So let's just go numbers wise first. What's your worst downswing in terms of money or time or even mentality? You might have had one that was, maybe not as bad money wise or time wise, but it was the hardest on you mentally. Like, just talk through your worst pieces of each of those.
Yeah, so I think the worst financially has been in that 100 to 150K range. And before this year, before 2022, I wasn't really playing small field contests, right? It was all large field 150 max contests. And as we all know, those contests are extremely variant and the swings are wild and long because you have to beat tens, if not hundreds of thousands of people. And that can take a long while to realize your expectation. So even though I was only losing 3,000 or 4,000 a slate, that's still losing 3,000 or 4,000 a slate every day. 4 months, right? So some of my longest down streaks were 6-7 months, right? A lot of times during the summer, PGA, MMA, when the only thing I'm playing are these large field GPPs and I'm not winning anything, and that gets tough mentally, right? So those have always been tough, and that has happened once or twice pretty much every single year since I've started doing this, right? 100K downswing. And even this year, despite all the success I've had this year, I've had a 60 or 70, 80K downswing. But I'm actually playing a higher volume this year. So the percentage of the bankroll isn't as high and the mentality hit isn't as large. So fingers crossed that I can continue to manage it as well as I have this year. But there's no denying that there's always been a big downswing every single year. And I think it's pretty much impossible to think that wouldn't happen.
Yeah, agree with that. And I think that's one thing that most people who play DFS casually or are just getting into it, they just don't understand. And the truth is you just really can't understand it until you experience it yourself or try to play DFS seriously. There's just no way around it. So, okay, how about outside of contest selection? Do you have any tips or tricks in dealing with the losses or the downswing? Does your process change when you're in the downswing versus how it is when you're on an upswing?
The process remains the same. I think I try to work my way out of it as far as I'm going to study every single thing possible. Whereas I think someone else on this show has mentioned before where you don't study as hard when you're winning, right? Because what are you going to change when you're winning, right? So yeah, I try to work my way out of it and study every single thing. And I work even more hours try to figure it out. But again, and maybe this is a detriment, but I I still try to push the same edges I have, right? I've always had that huge risk reward tolerance where what got me here was pushing these edges that other people aren't pushing. So when I see a play that's 2% owned in a contest and I truly think it's a great play, I still have to hammer that play. What I can do is limit the dollar amount that I'm risking on that bet, right? So maybe I'm playing less contests, but also the biggest issue here in Nero is I think for anyone who's experienced success in any walk of life, especially when it comes to a hobby or career that is bankroll driven, that once you reach a certain point and you start leveling up, you don't want to drop a level. And I think that's how a lot of people end up going broke because I win a milli. Now I can start entering 4K millis. I can max enter the 888, right? But then I go on a 100 or 200K downswing. Should I still be max entering the 888? Should I still be entering 4K millis? My bankroll says no, but my experience says I'm dropping down a level and I've worked hard to get to this top level. I'm not going to drop down. And that's how you keep pushing. That's how you end up down 600K, 800K. And then one day you look and your bankroll's gone, right? So I've always been aggressive in that regard, but I've always had that fear, as I talked about, that if I don't manage it properly, I can go broke, and I'm never going to have that happen. So I've been really cognizant about the contest enter and how much I'm risking, even if it's a bit aggressive, still having that awareness of it, while still pushing the edges individually within the contest.
Interesting. Yeah, your ego does not want you to go back down to the maxing the $5 contest after
Right.
you've been living up in the rarefied air of the higher dollar contests and higher dollar entries. Okay, that's interesting. It's just very easy, I think, to start playing. I'm not even talking about bankroll allocation. I'm just literally talking about lineup construction. It's very easy to start playing more conservatively when you're in a downswing and not even realize it. I know you and I've talked about this before, but it creeps in there like almost subconsciously. You're just like, I don't want to deal with this anymore. Like these plays are too risky. It's too, you lose sight of the fact that no, this is actually how you win in DFS. It's just very, it's very hard to keep that mindset when you're in that downswing.
And I think that's been helpful for me because I've always had that mindset. The opposite, in fact, whereas like if I'm going to win this, and I'm going to get out of this hole, I gotta do what got me here, and I have to keep pressing edges. And fortunately, I've never been the type to take on less risk. If what is going to get me out of this hole is the same risk that I've been employing, I just have, as long as I have that long term, that long horizon understanding of how the swings are going to go. And the day to day can be tough when you just keep losing, but you just have to have faith in that process. A quick timeout to remind you that this episode is sponsored by the Lineup Builder at Occupy Fantasy, powered by DFS Magic. Are you tired of expensive DFS optimizers not providing the settings and tools you need to create profitable lineups in all sports? Check out the Lineup Builder at Occupy Fantasy, created, built, and used by top DFS pros. Use it to hand build entries or automatically create up to 150 lineups using optimal lineup criteria and sport-specific settings. Visit occupyfantasy.com/lineup builder for more information. Now back to the show.
Does it ever get to the point where like this isn't worth it? Like how not worth it does it feel when you're in those really low points? Does it ever get back to the like I need to give this up and go back and get a corporate job type of scenario? And that could either be like for monetary reasons or mental health reasons. How much of that not worth it happens to you when you're at those low points?
So I feel like it's two separate ideas, the fact that whether it's worth it or not and whether or not I need to go back and get another job. Because for me, even when I wake up and I'm getting my teeth kicked in by DFS, it's always worth it for me because I love what I do and I have the freedom to do what I want to do. I know not many people can say that. And no matter if I'm down 100K in the last 2 months, I get to wake up whenever I want and I get to write about sports and talk about sports and I get to research sports and I get to talk to people who do what I love. And if I want to work out at 10 a.m., I can. If I don't want to work out until later, I can. If I want to go grab lunch with someone, I can. If I want to do anything, I can. And that always makes it worth it to me. But at the end of those downswings, when you're down six figures and that fear of, oh my God, the money's going to run out, when that creeps in, that's when should I go back and get a job? But fortunately, I've never reached that point. But it's always in the back of your mind. It's like, if I have to go back into the corporate life, what would I do? How would I do it? And that thought makes me miserable to think about. So it's just another driving factor of I gotta keep pushing with this because I do not want to go back to that.
Yeah, fair enough. Fair enough. One thing I'm curious about, I think you talked about your bankroll management during downswings and what you do to press your edges and your allocations and everything. How does it affect other things that you do from an investment perspective? And that can be, other risky assets, doing NFTs or rainmakers or, other things that you might be investing in that have a fair amount of risk. Do you tend to pull those back when you're in a DFS downswing, or do you try to, keep a wall between those two things?
Now that you say it, I do actually pull back a little bit in that area because when I'm winning, right? Like if I'm like this past couple months, I've done really well and I see rainmakers as a thing. It's like, okay, I'm willing to invest probably more than I would have if I was losing. But I'm just looking as a percentage of my bankroll and my life roll in that sense as well. This is a small percent I can invest here. This is a small percent I can invest in these NFTs or this project that I'm working on outside of DFS, whatever it is, right? But if I'm losing and my life roll has decreased as a result of my DFS bankroll decreasing, now I don't have as much extra spare money to invest in various things. So yeah, that actually does play a part, and it's not something I've actually vividly thought about until now.
I think that comes from, I just have a feeling or a sense that everybody has a max risk tolerance that they can handle. And I think people tend to focus on what's my risk tolerance inside of DFS or inside of this thing that I'm doing. Maybe I'm a professional investor or something. There's also all the other risks that you're taking along the way, financially speaking, in places that you invest. And I think like collectively, everybody has a max. And there are points, I think, where that DFS or whatever your thing is like expands out and sucks up almost all the rest of your max. And you're like, wait a minute, I don't actually want that other part of my money in, eating into my risk balance, my risk bankroll, as it were, because right now my DFS piece is consuming my risk bankroll and I don't have any more to spare.
Yeah, that's a great way to think about it. And yeah, it's not something I've actually explicitly thought about, but it makes a ton of sense and it's definitely true. And I have a high risk tolerance in most areas of life. There's also some areas of life where I have basically zero risk tolerance, and I think it's a balance. And that may be surprising when you see someone who does this for a living, but again, different areas require different risk levels, and I have no problem separating those risk levels in different areas of my life.
Cool. Okay, that's a good one. So I think in a little bit of a pivot, one of the things that I've always been impressed with since I've known you is that you're very reasoned, rational, balanced, often what I would think of as an ideal personality type to handle a long-term DFS grind. You've also got the unique family background that you talked about at the beginning. But I'm curious, that's my outside perspective. Do you feel that way internally while you're playing DFS, while you're sweating contest results, while you're grinding through prep work?
I actually do, and not to brag I really do feel like that's one of my strengths. And I think the big reasons people fail at this is they do let their emotions get out of the way, and whether that's tilt entering contests or tilting your bankroll management, I think that's a huge part in why so many people who could be successful players aren't successful players. And I have a really good grasp on that, and that comes from the background, I think. And I've got to this point where I'm 35 now, and I've had a ton of experience in all of those areas. I've witnessed gambling for close to 30 years. I understand it all. And so I think that helps. But also just for me personally, don't get too high or too low just in general in life. And so I think just my personality type helps that as well. And it is key. I mean, it's one of the reasons I started this podcast, right? It's one of the reasons we're talking now because it is so important. And I acknowledge that importance. I think that's another big reason.
Yeah, that's really good. I think just from an outside observer, I think you do that really well. And it's always interesting to me because emotional involvement in things is, one of the things that drives success for us as humans. You care about the things that you care about and that you want to get better at. Like it's that emotional investment is the part of the piece that drives you. But in DFS, you then have to like break that apart somewhere along the way and like let that emotional piece be a bit of your driver, but you then have to really be so unattached to the results. Like it really is Zen or Buddhist in that way. It's like it really, to do it successfully, you really have to laser focus on the process and not be attached to, you have to be attached to the results enough to know whether you need to adjust your process, but you can't be so attached to the results that it affects the way that you play globally in the game.
Right, which isn't like any other career, right? Like if I was like just go back to my day job, a marketing manager, right? If I was emotionally invested and I loved what I did and I cared about the process and I cared about the results and I let that drive me, I would be an amazing marketing manager, right? We would get great results. But if I care that much in DFS, it can have a negative impact, right? You do have to separate it some, but you also have to let it drive you. So it's, it is a very delicate balance. And I don't really think I've heard someone explain it the way you just explained it. And it actually makes a ton of sense. And also makes sense why it's one of the hardest things that I think you can do, especially when you're risking your own money doing it.
All right. Speaking of the money piece, do you notice any devaluation of money? Like, hey, if I don't max this showdown slate, I can pay my mortgage, or man, I just lost a car payment or a house down payment in the last X amount of months, or man, I've lost more in the last 6 months than the average American makes in a year. Do you play do those mind games happen to you as you're going through just your regular DFS year?
It did early on for sure. That first year when I wasn't used to those levels, it definitely played a part. And I was like, wow, that was my mortgage, right? That was a showdown slate. I could have paid my mortgage off. But now you just have to separate it. No matter, you just have to look at it as a percentage. Because if someone asks me and I'm out hanging out with friends and they're like, yeah, we just went on this trip. It costs 7 or 8K or whatever it was, and I was thinking to myself, I just lost 25K in PGA this past week, and we could have gone on 4 trips, right? Like you can't really think about it that way. I just have to think about it as this is the piece that is furthering along my bankroll, right? As opposed to here's an actual dollar amount. So this week I'm playing 8% of my bankroll. I'm not playing 25K or whatever it is. It just it becomes just and it also sucks because like I feel like you should recognize that, right? And just from a privilege standpoint, I have the ability to risk 25K this weekend. I have the ability to lose 100K this month when a large portion of people do not even make that in a year. I understand that, and I think we do have to acknowledge it, but you also can't let it instill fear or impact your decision making when you think about the actual dollar figures.
Yeah, I think it's just another one of those insidious places where money, because you keep score
Yeah.
with money in DFS, and money has a whole other meaning to 99.9 whatever percent of the population, because that's what you use to live your life and all of that. Like, keeping those two things spread apart is challenging for sure, especially at the level that you play at those amounts. Like, very hard to do that.
For sure.
Okay, one thing I wanted to touch on, and then I have a couple of lifestyle questions for you, and then we can wrap it up. Ton of MMA success this year, but I noticed in the world final for MMA, I think you were 9th out of 10. I think next to last.
Thank you for reminding me.
Yeah, you're welcome, man. I'm here to bring you back down to earth. Did you feel pressure to win going into that, or pressure to do well based on the success that you had previously? And then how did finishing in a way that you didn't like, how did that affect the experience? Again, I think that really gets into like the process and results stuff. Were you happy with your process? I can live with the results, or is that really hard to do in a live final setting, especially for you being a little more public facing and having some MMA success now attached to your personal brand and all of the stuff that goes along with that.
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. And even if it is a sore spot to bring up, no, I appreciate you bringing it up because, yeah, there was some pressure, just internal pressure of I need to keep doing this. And because throughout the year, people would send me screenshots of other discords of saying, oh, we can't let that court jesters guy win again this week or something like that. And it's like, I mean, if other people are thinking about me this much, then it almost becomes like a villain type situation where, okay, I got to win so people can keep talking about me and keep playing that role. And when it comes to the MMA Live Final, I talked about myself in a way where on podcasts or in tweets, that I felt like I was one of the best MMA DFS players. And there's a pressure to repeat that, even if it's in a one slate sample size of just 10 entrants, no matter how ridiculous it seems that you need to prove it in that one single data point, which is like, it's crazy to think about, right? Like that doesn't prove anything. It's one slate and it really shouldn't. But there
But
was,
your ego thinks
yeah,
it
of course.
proves something.
Of course, yeah, and other people think it proves something as well. So yeah, that's a part of it. And my process, I felt great about. I felt great about my lineup. Once the lineup's locked, I felt good about the ownership and everything. But I gotta say, live finals, everything surrounding the sweat is fantastic. The actual sweat is mostly terrible. And it's not a result of what DraftKings or FanDuel does. Their hospitality is fantastic during these events. It's just the fact that normally when I'm sweating a contest, I'm rooting by myself. No one else is reacting. And I'm also, just from like a logistical standpoint, I have my computer with me. I can check things. I can check live stats. I can, go through the contest easier. I'm at a live event. I can't really do that, right? I'm forced to do it on my phone, and it doesn't feel like I can truly understand the context of the slate as it's happening. But then as things unfold, other people are cheering directly against you. And like NFL, that happens. Like everyone's cheering at different times. But like MMA, I have this fighter, you have this other fighter. We're in the same suite. I lose, he wins. You're cheering. That fucking sucks, right? No one likes that unless you're unless you're on the winning end of that. So it's a pretty terrible experience overall. And I think if I'd have won, it might have been better. But still, it just wasn't a great experience overall. But again, I'm already going to try to qualify for next year. I already have qualified for the first one next year, and I'm going to keep trying to do it because I think it's an interesting game to play. I just don't think I'll be in it for the enjoyment as much as I thought I might have been for this past event.
I think part of that is just being a competitor and being competitive.
And I'm competitive as hell too, right? Like I hate
Yep.
losing so much, and that doesn't really come out in DFS when I'm by myself. Like when I played sports growing up, like I was competitive as hell, sore loser. I hated losing. I hated losing more than I liked winning, and that comes out in the live final as well, right? Despite not any like direct competitions, like they're winning, I'm losing. I hate that.
Yeah, I think that's a characteristic of many, not all, but many successful DFS players. It's also a characteristic of many successful people in other walks of life. It's just wanting to win something, whatever you're trying to play. I think the difference in the live final is, every day when you're sweating, it's like faceless, nameless, name on a computer screen, like it's just whatever, whoever, I don't even know who this person is. I've never seen that username before. And sure, other usernames you'll see all the time, but you're just like, if there's this disconnect when it's just the name on the screen. But when it's actually a person in a room with you, then it's literally like, going back to your sports days, you're like, I'm competing against somebody else. I'm directly going against, and like all of those old habits in your case come right back out in a way that they just don't when you're just playing like a normal everyday contest and it's just you and your screen.
100%. It would not be healthy if DFS was like that every single day. I would not enjoy it as much as I do now, for sure.
Totally agree with that. That would not be good. Okay, so let's finish off with a few lifestyle questions, and then your normal, kind of final advice pieces that you do on these podcasts. So, what's a typical day or week look like for you? You play DFS full time, but you also run a content site. What does that look like?
Yeah, so usually I'm up by 6, 7 o'clock in the morning, and I don't set an alarm. I just naturally get up that time because, again, I enjoy what I do, and I'm always excited to work every single day. So I get up, and normally I'm on the computer around that time as soon as I get up and get some breakfast. And I'm normally planning out the day first and foremost. What do I need to do today? What do I need to do this week? What do I need to do this month? What are any long-term projects I have to do? And it's really, a lot of it is the content side of things for most of the day. And then as we get later in the day, whether it's a daily sport or a weekly sport, I set aside time for my own personal play. And during that time, I'm able to work out during the day, and I try to exercise 6, 7 times a week. And because I find that to be extremely helpful, especially on like NFL Sundays or UFC Saturdays, where I'm just literally on a couch for 8 hours, 10 hours, not doing anything. For me to feel accomplished that day, I need to get some sort of physical exercise in. Plus, my body just feels better, and I put myself in a better mindset. I think you and I have actually talked about this before offline, where once you exercise and you feel that sense of accomplishment, you're in a better mindset to create DFS lineups because that sense of accomplishment is driving you to try to win. So I find that extremely helpful. So I do try to do that every single day. And then fiance gets home from work on weekdays, and we hang out, eat dinner. And then if I have stuff to do, I'll work at nighttime too, whether it's on the laptop, on the couch, or back in the office. And then on weekends, especially now, UFC and NFL, I'm working most Saturdays and Sundays, which can be difficult from just like a social life standpoint. But again, people in my life understand it and know that now, so it is what it is.
Yeah, that last part there is super interesting. I'm curious, like not only on the weekends part, but like it's holiday time and it's Christmas. It's like time to open presents. Where's Brian? He's back in the room grinding his NBA lineups and making late swaps and whatever. Of course he is. Like, tell him to get out here and it's time to do presents. Like, how does that work for you, your family, your friends? Like, it just seems it's such a different experience than I think 99% plus of the population experiences.
Fortunately, it's become so normalized within my family from even before, like, because I told you, my family bets on sports, right? So like
Yep.
Christmas and New Year's Day and all these other, Thanksgiving especially, these are obviously their family holidays. We get together, we're thankful, we enjoy time, we eat, we have presents. But it's also a big betting day for the family, and it's like, okay, Thanksgiving dinner's at 12, but the game starts at 12. Let's make sure everyone gets their bets in first before we sit down at dinner, right? And that has just become normal over my life. So on Christmas morning, when I have to do an NFL lineup, I'm so thankful for my parents and my family. It's like, oh, we eat breakfast at 11. Brian's got to do his lineups. Let him do his lineups at 10, then we'll eat at 11. And everyone's cool with that. And I'm very thankful for that everyone's willing to adjust their schedule around me. Believe me, I'm very thankful about that. I understand that is not a usual circumstance, but I'm very fortunate that everyone in my life understands that and is willing to do it because they have been doing it just in a smaller or maybe less important capacity their entire lives.
Yeah, the family that gambles together stays together.
That is for sure.
I think is the way that goes.
Yeah.
Okay, so you talked about, if you were single coming back from Vegas, it would have been easy to quit and make different decisions. So in that same vein, like it's one thing to do that as a single person, handling giant swings, 6-figure wins, losses, upswings, downswings, all that. What are those conversations like with your fiance? Going through, how much of that do you share? Does she want to know? Does she not want to know? Do you only tell her about the good stuff? Like, how does that work?
They're few and far between, actually. I don't think she cares to know as much, and I don't even want to subject her to the ups and downs on a daily or weekly or a monthly basis, even, because that's not fair to her, right? If I'm losing 60K in a month, she doesn't need to know or have that feeling of, holy shit, he lost 60K this month. Now she's worrying about my career and our finances, right? Like, that's just not fair to her. So I'll tell her when I win something big, and she'll get excited and she'll be appreciative. But she's sharp. She knows now, at least after a couple of years of doing this, it's like, she'll, oh, how did UFC go last night? Oh, I actually won. I won 100K. She's like, oh, that's great. How much did you lose the month before? Like, what's the positive? What's the net impact here? I was like, oh, I lost 60K. She's like, oh, it's good, plus 40. That's good, or whatever. Or it's like, oh, I'm actually been winning. She's like, oh, that's really sick then, whatever. So it's been, those conversations happen, but we're both pretty individualistic, and I think a lot of relationships, at least that I've seen and witnessed, the people in the relationships are dependent on each other. And obviously we depend on each other, but not in the sense that we need to depend on each other. And I think that's why our relationship works so well, is that when I'm working on a Saturday, she is totally fine, if not happy, to go hang out with her friends or go to happy hour, or go to the pool or whatever it is. And if I got to work, she's like, oh, do your thing, you work. And again, this is unusual, I think, because I don't think a lot of people in relationships would be able to have that flexibility. And again, we don't have kids, so that plays a big part as well. But for her to say that, I'm appreciative that I don't have a significant other that is like hounding me. Oh, you got to work again on Saturday. Can we go out and do it? She's totally fine doing it herself. And then, but we do things together as well. And I try to make time to do those things together as well. So again, it's a little bit of an unusual relationship, but I'm appreciative, and it actually works for both of us really well.
Yeah, it's very different when you have kids, just because of the level of mutual planning that's going on in that regard. But it's awesome that she can be supportive and also be hands off in that area. I think a lot of significant others, especially for people who aren't doing this full time or doing it as a hobby, or maybe even trying to do it as a serious hobby, it's just so hard, as you and I've talked about many times, from the outside, to understand the variance of what's going on, and understanding, again, that the money keeps the score. And so it's like when you say, if you said, oh yeah, well, I lost 40 points off the leaderboard in the last 2 months, that's a very different thing than saying I lost 40K in the last 2 months. It's just hard for someone who's not in the world to make that connection or make that disconnection. So it's great that she's able to do that, because that totally frees you up to be a better player.
Better player, and honestly, it frees me up to be a better partner as well.
Yeah.
Right? If I don't have to worry about her worrying about that, we're able to focus on things in our relationship that don't have the ups and downs like DFS plays. So again, maybe she'll listen to this and she'll disagree, but I feel like that works really well for both of us.
All right, cool. How about other people besides your fiance, like your friends, family? How's that grind that you go through positively or negatively impact that area of your life? Do you find it harder when you're in a downswing or something like that to have the same level of connection, to want to go out, hang out, be social, like all that stuff? Is that, when you're riding that roller coaster, does that change any of that stuff for you, any of those interactions?
That actually doesn't. I have zero problem separating the two. Maybe immediately after a bad loss or a tilting loss or something like that, I'll be less likely to go out. But again, that's few and far between. Really, for me, what it comes down to is, I've thought about this question, especially within the past year, and even after once the pandemic started, and now it's we're slowly getting back to normal life. I've thought, am I just busy, or is actually everyone busy? Because as you grow older, right, naturally you talk to people less and less that aren't in your immediate circle, and you feel bad. At least I do. I feel bad about it. It's like, damn, I haven't talked to him in a couple weeks or months. I normally used to talk to him every day or whatever, and that goes for a lot of friends, even my my extended family. I feel the same way about it, and it's like, okay, but they just had a kid. They just got married. They just moved. They just got a new job. They're doing whatever. And it's like, okay, am I being the bad friend or family member here? Or is it just, it's just life getting in the way? Because I do feel bad. It's like, damn, I haven't talked to them in so long. And I don't want to use my busy lifestyle as an excuse not to maintain those relationships. And even like when I do talk to people, even like my parents, right? Like they'll call me, like, oh, how's your day going? And it's like, oh, it's going great. I'm doing this. And they're like, well, I know you're busy. I don't want to keep you that long. But I don't want them to think that way, right? Because they're my parents, and you have limited time with everyone on earth, right? And I don't want them to think that they're keeping me from having our conversation because I'm so busy, right? And so these thoughts, especially in the last year or so, when tragedies happen, right? Nothing's happened personally, fortunately, in my life, but like, you see tragedies happen, you always think about, well, you're not promised any day. People aren't here forever, blah, blah, blah. And that just, especially this year, I've been thinking about it more and more, and I don't want my friends and family to think that I'm not reaching out to them or talking to them more because of my lifestyle. And I just had the thinking of, is it just everyone? Is this that busy? And I feel like everyone probably feels the same way.
Sure. Yeah, I think that's true. That when you were talking about that, it made me think of that great Wait But Why post about how often or how much less time you have with people than you think, like as you get older. Like he's got the graph and the decrease of the up that, like, It's just wild how much that shrinks as you get older and your parents get older, and how much less time you spend with them because they spend, if you look at the 100% pie that they spend with you, 90 whatever percent of that is when you're between the ages of like 0 and 12 and whatever, and then it just keeps decreasing and decreasing,
Yeah, dude.
from that point forward.
Yeah, no, it's crazy. Like my father had a health scare back in like March or something, what it was. And fortunately he was okay from it. And before that, he would call during the day and he's like, oh, I want to keep you busy, blah, blah. And we'd be like, okay, yeah, sure, I'll talk to you tomorrow, whatever. But now it's like, there may not be a tomorrow. So I don't want anyone to think that they're bothering me because I'm busy. And I want to make that a greater point of emphasis in my own life moving forward to let people know that I'm not that busy to where I can talk to you, hang out with you, be with you just because of my lifestyle.
Yeah, that's great. I think if you can keep that, as a focus and something that you're conscious of, like that's awesome. All right, last couple questions. How do you explain what you do to new people that you meet? I hear you ask this question, I think, pretty consistently in just about all your episodes. So I have to ask it to you.
I love the question because everyone embraces it so differently. And actually, I met someone new for the first time yesterday, and they asked what I did. And I just started by saying I run a sports data company, and if they are interested, fine. If they're not, cool. We don't have to. I don't have to talk about myself more than I have to. But if they're like, oh, sports data, what does that mean? And then I'll go, oh, we develop predictive models to try to predict the outcomes of sporting events. And then they're like, oh, that's cool. Or they say, oh, like betting or like fantasy. And then it's like, okay, now it's wheels up. Now we can start talking about this, right? And it comes back to the point of, do I find this interesting because it's what I do, or is it just truly that interesting to where I can talk about this with other people? And I really think it is just in general interesting because you don't meet that many people out there in the world who do this, as opposed to when you're at a party or a wedding or something. It's like, oh, what do you do? I'm a lawyer. Oh, I'm a manager. I'm whatever, right? Like all these like boring ass jobs, right? When people actually meet someone who does something like this, I think they're, at least if they're a social person, they're more inclined to ask questions. And I'm happy to talk about it because again, I love what I do, and I think it is interesting.
Well, yeah, it's a very non-traditional job choice.
Yeah.
So you could get some very interesting reactions for sure.
Definitely.
And then you talked earlier about sweating and watching most of the stuff that you're doing. Are there any sports that you don't watch and sweat, or do you watch and sweat all of them?
Yeah, again, it comes back to the point of if I enjoy it, I'm going to do it. Or if I don't enjoy it, I'm not going to do it. And so I've even cut out a lot of daily sports this year, baseball and hockey, because I wasn't enjoying the process as much. And I wouldn't really sweat those as much either because, again, it goes back to the relationship thing where it's like I can't watch every single sport, right? I got to have some time, and I want to have some time for my relationships. Yeah, so I don't sweat daily sports as much. I don't play them as much even anymore. But NFL is like a religion for me. UFC has become like a religion for me. And even PGA now I'll have on during the 4 days. As long as it's not a crazy sweat at the end, I'll be watching it.
Yeah, I never thought I'd hear you say that about PGA. Oh,
Well,
welcome to the golf world.
It's a great excuse to procrastinate, right? Thursdays and Fridays,
Yes.
that's on, and I should be doing this, but I could definitely be watching these shitty golfers miss the cut. So
Yeah, exactly. There's nothing greater than watching missed 4-foot putts on a Friday afternoon.
it is the absolute worst.
All right, so let's. This has been awesome. Thank you for being open and honest with your answers and for answering all my questions. Let's wrap it up with the final advice section that you have with all of your guests. So first one of those is, what's the most important skill to have in being a DFS pro? For all the listeners out there, you've got some pros, some hobbyists, some new people, some random people coming in. What would you say is the most important skill to have?
I think the number one ability to be a pro, or even do this successfully, is to not fold in the face of pressure. Like you can't blink, right? If you have an edge, you have to press it. If you have a belief, you have to go for it. And if you're losing, you have to keep playing. And if you don't understand the long-term ramifications of the variance, that's also a problem, right? So you have to understand it and embrace it, and you cannot be scared in any way, shape, or form. Nothing should impact how you build your lineups, how you enter your contests. Because once that starts happening, as you said before, if any outside sources start infiltrating your DFS process, you've already lost. So for me, that's number one. I can't let anything impact that process, and I cannot be scared or let fear drive what I'm doing on a day-to-day basis.
And any way to get that in your mind other than doing, other than repetition of essentially high risk type investing activities like horses, sports betting, DFS, you name it.
It's tough to do it without it, but the one way you can ensure that it doesn't impact you is playing within your means, right? If you're playing above your means, that's going to impact you. But if you can try to develop this skill by playing with 0.05% of your bankroll and you lose, cool, I've learned that. And that doesn't really impact what I'm doing, right? So play within your means, and I think naturally you'll get to that point, because for us, and I say us, people who have experienced sports betting, poker, horse, whatever it is, right? I've gone broke many times before, like well before I was an adult. People have done that, and that's how they've developed that skill, right? They've done it from experience. But if you don't have that experience, and be thankful you don't have that experience, then you have to play within your means to develop that skill.
Yep, totally agree. All right, last one. Knowing what you know now, what would you go back and tell yourself after winning that millie in the Super Bowl? Which I think is really the core question of, what would you tell somebody who wants to become a DFS pro?
It's a good question, and it's really tough. And I think for me, going back, I would tell myself, okay, you have the million, but let's develop a plan. And I developed a plan then, but it was a shitty plan. It was a really bad plan, really, because I'd never been in that situation before, right? Yep. And I would tell myself, and I think this is just the number one piece of advice, right? One, you have to, if you want to be a pro, like, you'll know, right? You have to live and breathe this. That's what it comes down to. If this is your hobby, you enjoy it, you just want to get rich quick, it's not gonna be for you, right? But like, if you literally love this shit, you'll know that you want to be a pro and you can work towards it. But to get there, you have to research a lot of things. You really can't cut corners. You can work smarter, not harder, but you still have to work, right? So for me, I would tell myself after I won the million, research every single thing. And this is a core tenet this year for me. Research every single contest, lineup type, sport before I enter a single dollar into it. And I did not do that the middle of the year. I was entering PGA and MLB and and hockey well before I felt really comfortable about my process. And that's a reason why I had a 6-figure downswing then. So I think just research, and you have to love it. That's the key takeaway for me.
Yeah, both those are really good. If you're in this one for the money, there's a lot easier ways to make money or make bigger sums of money than playing DFS. That's for sure. I don't think most people understand that. So you gotta have the love. All right, thank you, Brian. I appreciate, like I said, the openness and honesty on the answers. Thank you for letting me guest host and join you on the pod. I'm a big fan, and I listen to every episode. So I'll let you finish it up and close it off however you want.
Niro, I appreciate you for taking the time to do this. Appreciate you accepting. I just hope that you didn't do well enough that people will be wanting you to host season 2 next year. So I think you did well, but hopefully not that well. So I appreciate it, and appreciate everyone out there listening. Thanks.